response to the death of George Floyd, Ascension Wisconsin launched a new framework to address racism and systemic injustice. It's called Abide, and it's built on the hallmarks of appreciation, belongingness, inclusivity, diversity, and equity. Joining us now to discuss Abide is Antonina Olszewski. She's the Director of Spiritual Care and Mission Integration for Ascension Wisconsin. Thank you for joining us, Antonina. How are you?
Thank you. I'm great today. It's a beautiful sunny day. Thank you for having me, Andrea.
Well, I am glad to have you here, and I really would like for you to tell us a little bit more about Abide, because when you think about systemic racism and how it affects things like healthcare and education, policing, all of these things, I think it's refreshing to see a healthcare provider really think outside the box and really bring things together to help make a difference. So I'm eager to hear more.
So I should say Ascension was actually looking at issues of inequity prior to the pandemic, and the tragic death of George Floyd just accelerated that. But like all of our responses, this is our work in social justice, and our work to look at inequity is really an expression of our mission and our connection to the healing ministry of Jesus. We say in our mission that we advocate for a compassionate and just society in our words and our actions. And as we held that mission statement up to ourselves, we realized that injustice, racial injustice in particular, continues to plague our nation, and we needed to foster a more inclusive and diverse culture and community within our own walls, shall we say. So we really thought, okay, how do we do this? What do we do, right? And used a hallmark, actually used just the idea that we would take a pause, that we would listen to our associates, that we would learn from them, that we would pray, and then we would start some action. So we actually invited all 160,000 of our associates to listening sessions.
Wow.
And we said, we're not going to create any action. We're not going to ask you a lot of questions. We just want to open this space. We actually had it facilitated by an independent consultant so people would feel comfortable and safe. And we said, we want to hear from you. Tell us what you think about systemic injustice. Tell us what you think about Ascension's response to it. Tell us how you feel within Ascension itself coming to work. Do you feel like you're included? Do you feel like we're diverse enough? Do you feel like we're equitable? Do you think we appreciate you for who you are and who you bring? And we opened those floodgates, and people told us what they thought, and they told us what we needed to pay attention to. They held up what we did well, and we appreciated that. And they held up the areas where we had some work to do. So we sat back, developed this framework called Abide, and we're working, and we went to work.
And so when we look at systemic racism and all of these things, institutionalized scenarios, healthcare is one thing that's under the umbrella, as I mentioned earlier, but the pandemic really did bring it to light on how many disparities were out there when it came to minorities, not only African Americans, Hispanic, Native Americans, especially hit hard by the pandemic on so many different levels, but dying at the highest rates than any other race. So talk about how you guys approached that as a reality.
So I think no one within healthcare was surprised to see that there was systemic racism that is pervasive in healthcare as well. I think the thing that the pandemic really brought to light was that there are so many aspects of society that are outside of healthcare that contribute to people's health. So just the daily stress of being a person of color in many parts of our country, just the inequity in access to nutritious food, the inequity in access to healthcare overall, and quite frankly, once you enter the healthcare system, not always to feeling that you are welcomed or heard or that your dignity as an individual is respected.
Wow.
So we truly said, not only do we need to investigate some of the impacts of systemic racism on healthcare, but we really need to start with when someone walks through our door in any part of our organization, how do they feel? What is the approach that they look to us for to help them feel as if we're going to respect their dignity as a human being? And what we realized is before we could even look at the patient facing side of it, we really had to look at our own internal culture and our own associates. How do you feel when you walk in the door? Do you feel as if you belong here and as if your dignity is respected? And what we realized is we had a little bit of work to do in that arena. So one of the things I love about the hallmarks and the development of these hallmarks, and again, they stand for appreciation, belongingness, inclusion, diversity, and equity, is this feeling that you need to create a culture where everybody feels heard, where everybody feels respected and welcomed, where everybody trusts those around them. And particularly in healthcare, we know that populations of color, populations of vulnerable people, immigrants, have not always felt as if they can trust the healthcare system.
Right.
And so developing that feeling first amongst our own associates, that they could be heard, that they could bring their entire selves to work in all their diversity and uniqueness, that they could trust us as an organization and trust the work that we were doing together as a culture of people trying to address healthcare in all, but especially holding up the vulnerable and marginalized populations that we treat, really called us to get our own house in order first. And that really meant listening to the ways that our associates were telling us we needed to do a better job of hearing them and respecting them and appreciating them and making them feel as if they belong. Because what we know is if we create that culture internally, that will be reflected externally. So I will go on all day about this. I am very passionate about this.
Yeah, I was going to say that. There is no, and I think that's absolutely wonderful, because when you are hired to do a job, what's better than to have someone who is completely passionate about the goal and the mission that's at hand? So you have displayed that. And if you would talk about what all this means to you personally, that we've gotten to this point. There are some, unfortunate situations that brought us to having to talk about these things more openly than ever before. But how do you feel personally about us being right where we are and the possibilities of where we go from here?
Absolutely. So I am a woman of color who grew up in a professional society in the United States that has not always been equitable to women or to people of color. Right. My father is a Hispanic immigrant, so also a culture of not always being welcoming to immigrants. And I think anyone who thrives in a professional environment has learned to present what is acceptable to society, or at least let me say what we believe is what society wants. And we are acculturated to do so, right? So in being myself at work, I was always put in positions where I had to be less than authentic. So for instance, I very rarely wear my hair down at work because sometimes people will look up and say like, oh, that hair, it's not professional, right? And what they really mean is your hair as a person of color doesn't look like the dominant type of hairstyle that we want. So you need to do something differently with that. And that sounds like such a simple thing, but it says so much in my career. As a woman, great, you're an educated, intelligent woman, but maybe your voice shouldn't be too loud. maybe you should kind of follow the norm. And if it gets a little loud, you might be characterized as angry or overly emotional. And one of the things that I've found that this Abide framework has really opened up within our organization is the way we have honest conversations. If you had said to me 2 years ago, even, you're going to be in a meeting this year and you're going to have your hair just blown out and curly, and say, this is the way I'm showing up today. And you're going to say in the meeting, I'm just letting my hair down. And I mean that literally. And everyone will say, that's great. We didn't even know you had hair. You always wear it back. But just that sounds mild, but it's just characteristic of all of the ways that we accommodate the dominant culture so that we feel more comfortable and more accepted at work. And what I have really invited just my team, so I can speak personally, is tell me about your story. It's different coming to work if you look like some of my associates than other associates, right? It's very different being on call at 2:00 in the morning if you have to get into a car and drive in from, potentially Brookfield, or if you have to drive in from a different part of the city where you might be profiled as you're driving just to come to work to serve people.
Wow.
And these are the types of conversations I had never had with my associates. I
Yeah.
don't know that I didn't invite them, but they might not have been trusting enough to have them. So.
Wow, it's all so very important, and we've definitely had the conversations on really women being able to wear their hair the way it comes out of their head. No one should have to conform to look like anyone else, that is for sure, and that's a whole nother conversation. But
Yes, it is.
I thank you for being so open and honest and really just making everyone aware of the great things that's happening there at Ascension,
Thank you so much
Wisconsin.
for having us. We're very excited to have our associates build a culture that just spills over into everyone that comes through our doors.
Yes, well, thank you again for your time. And if you'd like to learn more about Abide, you can visit ascension.org/our mission/diversity and inclusion.